everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. So given that February is the month of love, the month of Valentine's Day, I thought that I would do some videos about not necessarily different romance tropes, but just different kinds of romance novels that I have truly loved over the few years that I've been reading romance. So today's video is going to be all about very emotional romance novels. These are books that I got so invested in, and they were just so emotional for me that I cried. And that's not something that is all that common. You know, a book has to be really truly amazing, and the characters have to be amazing for me to really feel that connected to them to get to that point where I'm gonna cry, you know? And this is actually a topic that was requested by Diana. I'm gonna link her booktube channel down in the description below. She requested that I talk about books that broke me, and quite a few of these books completely wrecked me, shattered my heart, but put it back together by the end because they are romance novels, so there is that guaranteed happily ever after at the end. So wow, let's just get into this. I have a stack of historical romances next to me, and then I have contemporary romances. I even have some manga on this list. There's a lot going on, but the first book I want to bring up is the most recent book that I've read on this list. That is The Duke Gets Even by Joanna Shupe. This is book 4 in Joanna Shupe's Fifth Avenue Rebel series, and we are finally getting Nellie and the Duke of Lockwood's romance. So Lockwood has heart problems, and this takes place during the Gilded Age in New York and in London. And so back then, heart treatment and heart surgery was getting more and more advanced, but with his issues, there wasn't really a clear treatment for him. And so for most of this book, anytime his heart problems are brought up, there is also this idea that he does not have a very long life expectancy. And so as Nellie, our heroine, is falling for him, she's also terrified of that. And there is this conversation that she has with her aunt Riona about why she's keeping Lockwood at arm's length. And Riona brings up, you know, you lost your mother at a very young age, and that was obviously very, very hard for you. And I think you're just terrified of that happening again, but you have to grab happiness where you can find it. And it's very clear that Nellie and Lockwood are absolutely perfect for each other. And so that scene made me cry. Like, pretty much anytime his heart problems were brought up, I was just like a sobbing mess. And then like towards the end, when they finally got together, this is also a romance where Nellie, our heroine, does the grand gesture, and I am a sucker for that. I love when the heroine is the one that has to do the grand gesture. It just really works for me every now and then, you know? And so yeah, I was just like dying and crying and just like so invested in this couple in a way that I haven't been invested in any of Joanna Shupe's other couples before. Next, I have a couple of romances by Julianne Long. So Julianne Long is one of the few authors that I have come across that can truly make me literally laugh out loud and cry in the span of one story. So I have 2 books of hers that are a part of her Palace of Rogues series that I want to talk about today. The first one is Angel in a Devil's Arms. So this series centers around the Palace of Rogues, which is this boarding house that Angelique, the hero of this book, which is book 2 of the series, and Delilah, who is the heroine of book 1, they run this boarding house together. And so the people that come to stay at this boarding house are very eccentric and quirky and absolutely hilarious. So in that way, these books always make me laugh out loud. But this romance in particular was about Angelique, who was a kept woman. So she is someone who survived by being a man's mistress. And so we see that she has a pretty tragic backstory in how she came to become a mistress. And then Lucien, our hero, he is a man of nobility. I believe he's an earl, but 10 years before the book starts, someone in his family tried to have him killed. And so since then, he's been pretending that he's really dead when obviously he's not. And now he's back in London and hell-bent on revenge. So both of our main characters have these tragic backstories, and they've never felt true love from their friends or family, really. And so seeing the two of them, I love how their romance starts because they just have this witty banter. Like Julianne Long is really great at writing banter, by the way. And so their romance starts off really fun in that way. But then as they start like confiding in each other and bonding with each other, we see that things get more and more serious. And by the end, I, once again, was just a sobbing mess. I thought that this romance was just so beautiful, the way that everything wrapped up. Like, honestly, truly, I want to reread this soon because I'm now forgetting if there was a grand gesture or like what the conflict was towards the end. But oh my god, this was just beautiful, but also hilarious. And then the other book in the series that I have to bring up for this video is After Dark with the Duke by Julianne Long. So this is book 4 in this Palace of Rogues series. So this is about Mariana and James. There is an age gap between the two of them. She's 25, he's 42. So James is a duke, obviously. And he comes to stay at this boarding house. Mariana comes to stay there too because she is an opera singer who is brought low when these two men who are complete idiots fight a duel over her. And so back then, if two men fought a duel over you, like, you were ruined. Like, your reputation was over at that point. And so she has to come stay at the Palace of Rogues. Like, she has no other place to go. And so their romance starts as like a hate to love, actually, because James judges Mariana for her past and for this duel and like all of that. And so they have some very tense exchanges for sure. But this becomes a friends to lovers romance because, like I said, Mariana is an opera singer. I myself am an opera singer, so I related to her in that way. And so a lot of what we sing is in Italian, but Mariana is not fluent in the language. She only knows like how to pronounce it and how to sing it. And so James offers to tutor her in Italian. And so through that, they become friends. And what really got me with this romance was the grand gesture, because James really does fuck up in a big way with Mariana, and he just shatters her heart and he feels awful about it. And so the grand gesture that he does for her, like, I'm getting emotional right now thinking about it. Oh, it's beautiful. It's so good. I think this book actually made me cry more than Angel in Devil's Arms, just because of the grand gesture element and like how well done it was. And I just felt so connected to this couple. I have 2 books by the queen, or one of the queens of historical romance. That is Lisa Kleypas. So first up with Lisa Kleypas, I have to bring up again the magic. This is a fan favorite amongst Lisa Kleypas fans, and for very good reason. So this is a second chance romance. This also has a very strong revenge plot element to it, where we have McKenna and Aline. They fell in love when they were about 17 years old, but basically Aline's father gets in the way. And so in order to make sure that McKenna doesn't try to come back for her, because she knows that her father is just going to unleash hell on McKenna, she pushes him away by telling him that she never loved him, basically. And so he leaves, he's heartbroken. Over the years, he becomes a self-made man, so now he's very wealthy. And so now McKenna comes back into Aline's life when him and his partner Gideon come to stay at Aline's family's estate, I believe for a house party. And so McKenna is hell-bent on revenge against Aline, and his idea is to make her fall back in love with him so that he can then break her heart. This, oh my god, this romance. Well, first of all, there's 2 romances in this, and I thought that they were both very well done, because the other one is Gideon, and then I believe Aline's younger sister. Loved that secondary romance, but McKenna and Aline, oh my god, their connection, their love for each other, the angst, oh man, and there's just things getting in their way. And we learned pretty early on in the book that Aline, her whole family went through this really bad house fire, and now she's got like scars all over her legs. So now she's very self-conscious about her legs, and then falling back in love with McKenna. And, you know, she's terrified of him discovering her scars and things like that. Like, there's just like so much going on in this book. Like, another one that I need to reread, because man, did it pull at my heartstrings. This is just a gorgeous story. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Like, honestly, truly, if you're looking for a good place to start with Lisa Kleypas, I would highly recommend, again, The Magic. And then the other Lisa Kleypas book that made me cry was Then Came You. So this is book 1 in, I believe it's like the Gamblers of Craven series or duet. I personally love Then Came You way more than Dreaming of You, and I know that that's a controversial opinion. I know. Please don't unsubscribe from me because I said that. Like, this story just means so much more to me than Dreaming of You ever could. So we have a heroine, Lily. She is someone that loves to scandalize London society. Literally the first chapter of this book is her at this party on a yacht, and she jumps off the yacht into the Thames to retrieve her hat that blew off her head. She just loves to put on a show for London society, and even like the Prince Regent himself is on this yacht. Meanwhile, we have Alex, who is Lord Wolverton, I believe. Yes, he's an earl. And he is someone who has vowed never to fall in love, and he sees Lily's antics and he is just unimpressed. He is like the opposite of Lily in so many ways, and so it turns out that Alex is engaged to Lily's younger sister, Penelope, but Penelope doesn't really want to marry him. She's being kind of pressured into it by her family, and so what ensues is one of the best hate to love romances I have ever read. The dynamic between Lily and Alex is truly unique to me. Like, you could feel that they had real animosity between the two of them, but it was still entertaining at the same time. And the way that these two start falling for each other, and this is quite a messy romance too, lots of angst, like it was everything. But what really pulled at my heartstrings is something we learned pretty early on in the book, is that Lily actually has a daughter who's about like, I would say like 3 or 4 years old, but a few years before this book starts, her daughter was taken from her. She has no idea where her daughter is. She really has no idea if her daughter's still alive. She's just desperately hoping that she is. And so a lot of Lily's character centers around that, around her like desperately trying to be reunited with her daughter. And so that whole dynamic made me cry so much, just because like you can't help but feel for Lily and that kind of pain that she was going through. And then how that all wraps up towards the end, it was stunning, it was beautiful, and like the way that like Alex and Lily find their way to each other by the end, it's just all so beautifully done. This is absolutely one of my like top 5 favorite historical romances. That's how much I adore this book. Next one that I have to talk about is The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath. To this day, this is the only book that I've read by Lorraine Heath that has made me cry. So this is affectionately known as the Gorilla Twins romance by people in the know in the book community, but this is about Edward and Julia. So when this book starts, Julia is married to Edward's twin brother, and she is pregnant with their child. So Edward and his twin brother, I can't remember his name, but they go, I think his name was Albert, maybe, but they decide to go on one last safari before Julia gives birth. But this happens very early on in the story. Edward's twin ends up getting mauled and killed by a gorilla, which is why this is called the Gorilla Twin romance. And so before he dies, Albert makes Edward promise that he will pretend to be Albert. He will go back to Julia, pretend to be her husband, so that she's not in any like emotional turmoil when trying to give birth. Insane, right? Like Lorraine Heath, y'all, she comes up with the most insane plots, but they always work. And there's always plot twists galore, and it's just like insane. But he goes back, he does pretend to be his brother. And so theirs is kind of a hate to love, actually, because before him and his brother went on the safari, like Edward and Julia like always bickered. Like they kind of hated each other, mainly because like Edward felt that Julia was taking his brother away from him. And so now that he's back in London pretending to be his brother, he can't help but fall for Julia as he's taking care of her and making sure that she's healthy. And then she eventually gives birth to her daughter. So there were quite a few elements of this book that made me cry. One of them was the scene that described Albert's death. It just felt very real to me and just so tragic, because Albert really did love his wife and vice versa, you know, and he knew that he wasn't going to make it back to her. And also Edward giving up his own life by pretending to be his brother. He had to then pretend that he was actually dead. They had to pretend that Edward was the one that died. Like, it was just absolutely insane. And then seeing Julia and Edward fall for each other once it was revealed who Edward really was just so heart-wrenching, so heartbreaking, because there were so many things getting in their way. So much angst in this book as well. It was just beautifully, beautifully done. One of the most beautiful and romantic romances I have ever read, which is really saying something, obviously, because I read romance all the time, but this book will always just stand out in my mind. The last historical that I have to bring up is The Rakess by Scarlett Peckham. Man, it's been a while since I've read this book. I've read this in 2020 when it came out, and I went into this not expecting much because a lot of my friends who were reading the arc gave it 3 stars. I think they were just expecting a bit of a different vibe and story, because the premise led you to believe that it was gonna be a bit more lighthearted, maybe a bit more of a comedy, but this is definitely a drama. This is a very heavy historical romance where we have Seraphina, our heroine. I will never not love this cover, by the way. I'm absolutely obsessed, but she's not in a good place. She has a very tragic backstory. She's also an alcoholic at this point, and she is trying to be an activist and an advocate for women's rights. And obviously during this time period, I believe this takes place during maybe the Regency era or some point in the 1800s, like during that point in time, feminism was not all that well received, right? So she's going through a lot, and because of her tragic past, people of society just deem her to be a whore, basically. And so she kind of lays into that reputation, and that's kind of what she becomes. She becomes a Rakess, you know? She does whomever and whatever she wants. She's just trying to live her life and trying to cope with her past and with her present at the same time. And so then we meet Adam, the hero here, who is a single father. He's a carpenter, and it's their romance, and it's just such a sweet and tender and beautiful romance. And I loved seeing Seraphina become the woman that she was always meant to be. And because of her backstory and because of everything she's gone through and everything she's going through in this book, like, I just couldn't help but feel incredibly invested in her story, and I teared up and cried quite a bit while reading this. Like, this is just a beautiful, beautiful romance. Highly, highly recommend. All right, now we're finally getting into the contemporary romances. I do really quick want to bring up Sweat and Soap, which is a romance slice of life manga series that I started reading this past year in 2022. I absolutely adore this romance between Notori and Asako. This series has made me cry multiple times, and it's not because it's a heavy story, because it's not by any means. This series is all about their romance and you know, kind of their day-to-day life, like I said, and just different little obstacles that get in their way, and how they clearly communicate with each other, and they just love each other so much. So what's made me cry every time I read a volume, like literally every volume I've read has made me at least tear up, is just because of how sweet their romance is. And like in this first volume, I was a goner when Notori was like confessing his feelings for Asako. It's just such a sweet, such a tender and beautiful romance that I cannot get enough of. I've read the first 5 volumes at this point. There's 11 volumes total. I am definitely savoring this series. I'm trying my best not to rush through it because I don't want this series to be over. Man, this series and this couple just have my heart and soul. Next up, I want to talk a bit about Claire Kent. I have read 3 books by this author. All 3 of the books have made me cry. Claire Kent, man, she just knows how to pull at my heartstrings. She gets me every time. So Haven was the first book that I read by her. This is a post-apocalyptic survival romance series. This first novella is about Jackson and Faith. They run this commune together called Haven. This one's kind of like a colleagues with benefits to lovers romance, because we see at the beginning of the story that they do a pretty good job of running this commune together, but they definitely bicker a lot. They don't really get along, but at night they live in the same house together, and so every now and then Faith will just go to his room, and their intimate scenes are like intense. Like the chemistry and the connection between these two is just like scorching, but they don't really have a connection beyond the bedroom. So it's just really interesting to see like how their romance progresses. And the reason why Claire Kent's romances always make me cry is because her heroes are very stoic and grumpy, and her romances are only from the heroine's POV, so we don't get to see into the mind of these heroes until the end, when they finally confess their true feelings for the heroine, and it always gets me. I always cry. Like, so good. The other 2 books that I've read by her are Last Light, which is a standalone in the same world, technically a prequel to this one, and then I've also read Hold, which is a space survival romance that is just crazy, intense, but beautiful at the same time. So yeah, Claire Kent is absolutely one of my new favorite authors. She's an author that I just don't want to rush through reading her books because then I'll have to wait for her next book, you know? Another series that, oh man, this series I did not expect to get me the way that it did. This is the Succubus Blue series by Rachel Mead. This is an adult paranormal romance series about Georgina, who is a succubus, and her romance is with this man, Seth, who is a mortal human. And so if you don't know what a succubus is, when they have any kind of sexual relations with a human, they take a bit of their soul with them. Like, that's how succubi sustain themselves, is through souls of mortal men. And so that's one of the many things getting in the way of Seth and Georgina's romance. And the way that everything wraps up in the final book, which is book 6 of this series, I was a sobbing mess. Like, this series, I don't know if I've ever cried as much as I have when reading the final book of this series. There's just an amazing plot twist, an amazing redemption arc going on that I could have never expected, and I was a mess. I was a sobbing mess by the time I finished this series, and I just cannot recommend it enough. Man, I just wish that more people would read and talk about this series, because I really do think that it's aged well. I think this originally came out around like 2007, like around the time that she wrote Vampire Academy, but it's just so good. And I also love that this series has a really great, dry and sarcastic sense of humor to it. Next up is, we have my top 2 favorite contemporary romances that I read in 2022. Man, did these books get me. Whew! So the first one I'm going to bring up is Real by Kennedy Ryan. I mean, come on, any book that you're going to read by Kennedy Ryan, you gotta know going into it that it's gonna be heavy, it's gonna be emotional, it's gonna be beautiful, and you're most likely gonna cry at some point. But this one is just like a beautiful, epic romance between Cannon, who is a film director, and Neva, who is an actress. And basically Cannon discovers her when she is the understudy for a lead role on Broadway, and so he casts her as the lead in his next movie. So their romance is somewhat forbidden because Cannon has dated an actress before, an actress that was in one of his films, but it blew up in his face. And so now he is hell-bent on keeping all of his actors at arm's length for sure. And then Neva is trying to keep him at arm's length because she doesn't want to be deemed unprofessional, you know, but they cannot deny this connection between the two of them. This is a stunning romance that is truly soulmate level. Oh my god, like there's just so many amazing things going on in this book. There's like a historical fiction aspect to it because they're filming this movie about Desi Blue, who was a fictional jazz singer from the 1930s and 40s. So you get like snippets of the script of the film, and it was just all done so well. I also want to point out that there is chronic illness representation for Neva. She has lupus, and I can't speak to the representation all that well, but I can say that it was beautiful. I thought it was beautifully done. And then my top favorite romance or contemporary romance that I read in 2022 was Behind the Bars by Brittany Cherry. Man, did this book make me a sobbing mess, like multiple times throughout the book. I broke down in tears. I was a mess. This is such a heavy and emotional and beautiful childhood friends to lovers romance between Jasmine and Eli. And they fall in love when they're in high school, but there is some very intense bullying going on towards Eli, the hero, back then. And I do want to point out that there's kind of a violent death on page. And so then they end up separating for reasons. Jasmine ends up moving away. Also, music plays a very big role in this book. As you can kind of tell, there's like music notes and then bars. Behind the Bars has like multiple meanings you find out throughout the book. But yeah, they separate. Jasmine comes back to New Orleans where this takes place. And I love that this takes place in New Orleans because that's where I'm from. And I really felt like I was there, you know, like in the French Quarter. But she comes back to town. She realizes that Eli is a completely different person. And whew, the way that they find their way back to each other is nothing short of stunning. I cried so many times. If you want a romance like truly out of Honestly, truly, out of all the books on this list, if you want a romance that will absolutely shatter your heart and soul, but somehow put it back together again by the end, like, this is the book you have to pick up. I feel like this is a very underrated book from Brittany Cherry, but it is stunning. It is just amazing. And then 2 more books I have to talk about. I have Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. This is a beautiful, epic, small town romance between Bree and Archer. Archer is mute. And so there's actually some like suspenseful elements and like mystery elements going on throughout this story, but the connection between Bree and Archer is truly, like, once again, soulmate level. You can't help but feel for these characters and for their romance. It was just so beautifully done. And there is a part in this book, if you have read this book, you know what I'm talking about, where you are going to want to throw your book against the wall. It is going to make you angry and upset, but if you keep on reading a few more pages, you'll be fine. But like, just know that Mia Sheridan like goes there at some point and like, oh my God, my heart was shattered. Like, I did not know what to do with myself when I read that part of the book, but just, once again, a stunning romance that I cannot recommend highly enough. I need to reread this at some point. Oh, it's so good. Last but certainly not least, we have my favorite romance that I have read by Mariana Zapata so far. That is The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. As you can see, this is a chunky book. It's over 600 pages. This is a contemporary romance between Vanessa and Aiden. It's a marriage of convenience, actually, because Aiden plays for the NFL, but he's from Canada and he's about to get deported because I think his green card like runs out or something. So basically he needs to marry an American citizen so that he can stay in the States. And so Vanessa, his personal assistant, agrees to do that for him. And so this is one of those romances where we have a grumpy and stoic hero, just like with like Claire Kent's romances, where, you know, Aiden doesn't use his words very often, but he absolutely uses actions. And then towards the end, when he finally confesses his feelings for Vanessa, and when they finally share their first kiss, like, y'all need to know, if you don't know, Mariana Zapata is the queen of the slowest of slow burn romances. You will not get a kiss between the couple until, honestly, truly, like the last 100 pages. You know, and you definitely won't get a confession of love until that point either. And so when you do get to that point, like, I just couldn't help but tear up and cry, because it was just like so amazing how Mariana Zapata, you know, dropped these little breadcrumbs throughout the book of their growing relationship with each other. And so when they finally get to that point where they confess their love, it's amazing. It's everything. Cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's absolutely one of my like top 10 romances that I think I've ever read. I love Vanessa and Aiden so much. So that is going to be it for romance novels that made me cry. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about some romances that made you a sobbing mess as well, because I'm always looking for more emotional romances in my life. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!